School of Social Work was located. And so my rather stringent economics training was leavened by people who actually were concerned about real people. And I think it had a tremendous impact on me, as did Dimitri himself. In fact, I was thinking as I was preparing for coming over here that I think Dimitri was possibly the second or third person I met on campus on that very first week I was here. And he welcomed me here, and I'm thrilled that we've been friends now for 41 years. I also have to tell you how exciting it is to be back on campus, because while I've taught, as you heard, the University of Massachusetts, and I'm now at Northeastern with my dear friend and colleague, Mike Dukakis and Kitty, I still have a very warm place in my heart for this wonderful place. I came here when C.V. Joyce was president.
Yeah, that's right.
A couple of years later, of course, Father Monin came, Frank Campanella was here. And I have to say, of all the places I've taught, and of all the places I've lectured in across the country and around the world, there is no place that I think is warmer and more humane than Boston College. And it's because of that history of people like them and Demetrius that made those 16 years I spent here so wonderfully. I also have to tell you one little story. Governor Dukakis and I have taught together for many years, and one of the things we teach is called the Open Classroom. And the Open Classroom is a real graduate seminar. I have real students writing term papers, taking exams, but the lectures are open to the public. Anyone can come. And this year, this semester, we're doing policy advice to the president. And we've had an array of truly amazing individuals as guest speakers. We began with economics with Larry Summers and Greg Mankiw. Greg is the chair of the Harvard Economics Department and I guess continues to be an economic advisor to Mr. Romney. We had a number of people on healthcare. We had Eric Rosengren, the president and CEO of the Boston Fed. But just a couple of weeks ago, we turned to foreign policy, and Mike invited Ambassador Nicholas Burns, who now teaches at Harvard. And he is one of the most distinguished diplomats in the history of this country. I think he was ambassador to Greece, he was ambassador to the United Nations, he served with Condoleezza Rice, he helped formulate our policies in Iran, Afghanistan, and many places. And when he arrived in the lecture hall with 300 people there, I walked down to the front and I stuck out my hand and I said, Mr. Ambassador, it is such an absolute honor to have you here at Northeastern University. And I must tell you, it is a personal honor to finally meet you. I've been a great fan of everything you've done over these many years. I followed you in terms of your career. I follow your op-ed in the Globe every week. So it's just wonderful to finally meet you. And the ambassador turned to me and says, well, actually, Barry, we've met before. But, oh my God, I cannot remember ever meeting this guy. And then he says, I was a student in your undergraduate political economy course in 1978. And I felt amazingly proud and older than Demetrius.
Yeah, he's a graduate of.
He's a graduate of Boston College and one of our wonderful graduates. In fact, we are going with the former Dean of Arts and Sciences, Joe Quinn, from Boston College, to the BC basketball game on December 4th with Nick and his wife.
Terrific.
Yes, we're great fans still. But I just wanted to say briefly about how an economist looks at these issues. And actually, it takes me back to a wonderful moment. You now own it. But before you owned it, Boston College, the Archdiocese of Boston had their headquarters right here. In fact, the home for Bernard Cardinal Law. And when I had first just arrived at Northeastern University to begin the development of the Center for Urban and Regional Policy, which in 2008 became the Kitty and Michael Dukakis Center for Urban and Regional Policy, I got a call from the Cardinal's secretary and simultaneously from the president of the Greater Boston Chamber of Commerce, Paul Guzzi. And I was invited by both of them to come over to the Cardinal's residence to talk about the crisis in affordable housing. Housing prices had been going up at double-digit rates. And so I went there, and the Cardinal was in his wonderful attire, and Paul Guzzi was in a three-piece striped suit, and we talked about affordable housing. And in the course of that conversation, I remember the Cardinal saying to me, Barry, we need you to study housing because it is a moral obligation that we have decent housing for all our people. And I remember looking over at the president of the Greater Boston Chamber of Commerce, a dear friend of mine, Paul Guzzi, and Paul saying, "It may be a moral obligation, but I know it's an economic necessity. If we do not provide housing that's affordable, we won't be able to retain young people in the Commonwealth, and we're going to have a trouble fulfilling all the jobs we want to create." Moral obligation, economic necessity. Well, given that we're now facing the fiscal cliff that Governor Dukakis mentioned, I did a piece which I hope may show up in the New York Times. I've sent it off to the op-ed, in which I thought about what should we do in terms of dealing with the dual problem of slow economic growth and major deficits in federal debt. We have two problems. And how do we do it in a way that both fulfills our moral obligation, but also solves an economic necessity? So I went back to the data and I said, let's take a look at where income has flowed over the last 5 years. And it turns out that 87% of all the net increase in income over the last 5 years, 87% has gone to the richest 10% of all Americans. And I have no problem with that, in a way.
In a way.
In a way. 87% go to the top 10%. This is a period of time which we've also had very sluggish growth, and I was trying to figure out, now, why, with this income growth, would growth be so slow? And I started thinking about, what do we need right now more than anything else? What we need is not more savings. We've got tons of savings. We got $2 trillion sitting around in the coffers of major corporations waiting to be invested once they think they can produce something that will be sold. Savings is not the problem. The real problem is spending. We simply don't have enough spending. We need more spending by people. So what I have suggested is, let's take a look at who spends money and who saves. Well, rich people save. In fact, if you look at the top 1% of all American families, they save about 51 cents out of every additional dollar they receive. They spend 49 cents out of every dollar. On the other hand, if you look at the poorest 1/5 of the population, those are low-income families, they spend virtually 100%, 99.6% of every dollar is spent. And if you look at the second and third quintile, including middle America, all of them spend more than 90% of additional dollars. So think of it this way. If you took $1,000 and you taxed a rich person at the 1% level, and you taxed another $1,000 from them, and then you transferred it to, let's say, the first 3 quintiles in the form of a tax rebate, you would give up about $490 worth of spending on the part of the rich family, but you'd gain $990 worth of spending of the first 3, with a net increase of $500 going into the spending stream. Note, for Republicans, we're not putting one more dollar into government spending. We're letting people spend their money. So I argue not for raising taxes back to 38.6% from 35, but that we should have a temporary increase of marginal tax rates, particularly on the top 10%, of 50%, which would get us back to the horrendous tax rates of the very liberal President Ronald Reagan, and hold it there until the unemployment rate is under 6%, and then lower it again. And that is the kind of thing we want to do because it is the morally right thing to do. So we take some of that 87% of that income that went to the top 1% and redistribute it without really doing much harm to the wealthy, but put it precisely in the hands of people who need it desperately, will spend it, and thus move us toward the full employment we need, in the process probably making the rich even richer. Well, it's wonderful to be back here at Boston College, and it's especially wonderful to be here with my Greek friends, Dimitri and Michael.
You know what they say about being last in a panel or speaking and so on, that the other said everything, there is nothing left for you to say. And when you deal with Michael Dukakis and these distinguished members of the panel, this is even more true. So it's very difficult. On the other hand, it gives you the opportunity to say a few things about what the other said, and they don't have a chance to answer you. So it's very easy. Starting with Mike and his problem with entitlement. I said it in many respects, and I have no particular vested interest in that, except for one thing, that entitlement was meant, I think, to be, at least that's what I explained to my students, that this is not charity, that we're talking about something that people are entitled to as human beings, not charity, not philanthropy. And in that sense, I'm not worrying too much about the entitlement, although I don't like the term either. Going to my friend Barry about spending, of course, economists should support spending. What else? I mean, what else is left? But let me give you just one statistic that came to mind while you were talking. I saw the other day that Americans spend $8 billion in cosmetics. This is $2 billion more that you need to provide basic education for everyone in the world. So spending, yes, but spending where is, I think, the hardcore of social policy. And this is the challenge for poverty. We all want to do something about it. We have to spend some money. There's no magic to do anything without spending money. But the problem is how you spend this money, who is spending the money, what priority we have. And this is the question that I wanted to raise with you tonight. We know a lot about poverty. Some of it is exaggerated, some of it is not. For example, strictly under the poverty line in the United States, we have 46 million people right now in poverty. This is more, this is as high, I would say, as when President Johnson declared the war against poverty. So all these years, since the 60s, the only thing we were able to do is to stay, to have as much poverty as we had at the time, and social exclusion as well. So what have we done for all this time? Are we going to continue doing the same thing? Where is it going to get us? We have two choices, really. Either to assume business as usual and accept what's happening as something rather natural. And if you're very conservative, you may even claim that it is desirable and unavoidable to have poverty, which of course is not true. But this is what we will all do if we accept business as usual. And business as usual means that not only we're not going to do anything about the moral crisis that we have today, and I agree with the point you made and with the comments that you made, June, that it is a moral crisis. It's not a matter of bad behavior, a few bad people who just didn't make it because of the fault being their own. It's social crisis, which means that there is something systemic that makes these people unable to make it. So it's 46 million people officially under poverty. But most of the studies indicate that in essence, the people that are in poverty, the new poor and the almost poor, which are usually ignored, are 150 million people, Americans, today unable to make it. There is one study that impressed me. I'm not so sure that I subscribe to the way the study reasons the facts, but anyway, the study says that by the year 2050, we're going to have 900 million poor added to the present one. So the option to do nothing, business as usual, is not only going to do absolutely nothing to deal with the present crisis, but is going to do nothing for what is coming ahead. All the panelists and the governor alluded to the critical fiscal problem that we're facing. Sure, we're going to have more deficit than we have now, at least for the next 10 or so years. Economists don't want to predict things more than 7 years, rightly so. But if you do project it to 10 or 15 years, our income and the high interest we pay, we're not going to have money. The federal government, the state governments are not going to have money enough for the either entitlement programs or the minimum social security programs or social insurance programs. And that will perpetuate. I don't believe we're going to have 900 million Americans more in poverty by the year 2050. I think we will be doing a number of other things that will be much more effective than what we have been doing since President Johnson. But we have another alternative, another option, which is to commit ourselves, and I mean ourselves individually even at this point, that we're going to go away from here tonight with a commitment that we're going to be doing something about this situation, which is unacceptable morally, ethically, from the social justice viewpoint, from human rights viewpoint. And the question that I have is, what do I tell my students that they have to do individually? What kind of framework we can use? There are many proposals how to fight poverty and how to eliminate poverty. Some of them are excellent work, some of them might not be that excellent. But how do we choose the one that will be really effective? And this is what concerns me. And I start with an individual commitment that we must all have, that we have to make a difference. We have to be able to contribute to the solution. Without this commitment, I don't think we will provide the leadership for what has to be done, which is a mass movement. Not necessarily the Occupy Wall Street movement, but that taught us a number of things as well, provided some leadership, brought the point that was made before about the 1% really having all the power and controlling the rest 99%. And that is not going to be acceptable in the future, at least for as long as we have a value